Let's call them the new USC, and they may just be the best team in the Pac-12, although it's going to be difficult to get to the Pac-12 championship game. We bring in Nick Dempsey from Conquest Chronicles to talk some USC UCLA, one of my favorite rivalry games, maybe the 2016 version aside, Nick, may not be the best game of the weekend.
Yeah, these teams are just heading in absolute opposite directions. At the beginning of the year, everyone thought, well, UCLA is probably going to be better than USC. They'll win the South. And after that 1-3 start at USC, everyone thought, oh, USC they're dreadful. They're going to fire their coach. And October and the first 2 weeks of November, the reversal of fortunes for both of these teams has been shocking. USC has jumped all the way to the 13th in the playoff committee rankings. And UCLA, on the other hand, is desperately battling just for a shot at a bowl game. So this is, it's weird how we got here, even by Pac-12 standards. But yeah, there's just not as much excitement, I would say. And I think that's fairly standard anytime in a rivalry game you have one team that's just absolutely struggling. But I think the journey has been far more entertaining than the conclusion here.
It took a home game against Oregon State to get UCLA off of a losing streak. So it took the very worst of the Pac-12 at home and not necessarily a rout, 38-24. Yes, the Bruins have been down here. They started off with lofty expectations. They lost a tough game against Texas A&M on the road in overtime. Josh Rosen, of course, in place to build upon what he established as a freshman, but he was lost for the season fairly early on. And it was a number of excruciating losses early, and then the wheels have come off the rails for the most part since then in losing to the likes of Utah and Colorado. And this team is just in a bit of a quandary in regards to an identity with a backup quarterback in Mike Fafal and the running game that's arguably one of the worst in the Pac-12, facing a USC defense that is lights out right now.
First off, let me correct you. It's not arguably one of the worst in the Pac-12. In fact, it is in the entire country, out of 128 teams, their rushing offense comes in at 127th. So they are almost dead last in the country in rushing. And the team that's behind them is definitely not in the Pac-12. So they switched up their identity. They wanted to go to more pro style, run heavy offense. Wanted to be a little more Stanford-esque, perhaps. But there was a concern in doing that they didn't have the big guys up front on offense to pull that off. And judging by their 2.9 yards per carry for the season, that's 100% what happened. They do not have the people to pull that off. Now, Josh Rosen, he did start this season. He's great, but every quarterback needs some semblance of a running game to get going. Even Washington State, who used to throw it 80 times a game, has now started running the ball. So you take away that running game, you make them one-dimensional, they're going to struggle. Now you've got Rosen gets hurt, he goes down. You bring in the backup, and now he's got to come in without really any starting experience, and he's got to try to do all the heavy lifting on offense because the running game just cannot get going. I think he's underwater now in his touchdown to interceptions ratio. I think he's at 9 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. I have a hunch that he's probably pretty talented. It's just the situation is just not a lot of guys we're going to be successful in.
Yeah, UCLA's got a load of running backs that get the football. So Jamabo is the most highly recruited. But as you mentioned, at 2.9 per carry as a team, not much to support a passing offense that even Josh Rosen would have had difficulty with defensive ends being able to tee off on the pass game. But Faithful at 9 TDs, as you mentioned, with 10 picks, completes 54% of his passes, not in that league. So the entire offense is pretty much bogged down until they hit Oregon State last week, but they were scoring 10, 15, 20 points a game against a number of teams, although they had a complete anomaly against Utah with the Utes coming to the Rose Bowl in a 52-45 game in which the over-under for Vegas was somewhere in the 30s because they figured nobody's scoring in this game. And then all of a sudden there's 5 touchdowns on the board in the first quarter. So I don't know what happened there, even though I caught some of that game. But it's a very talented UCLA team. And before we focus on USC to really put this into focus, because they're the team on the move that has something to play for, I'm just really a bit perplexed about this UCLA situation. And I know injuries come into play, and it's just not Rosen. It's a number of places elsewhere on the team. But here's Jim Mora, who took over a program that was a middling Pac-12 program, initially gave them life, garnered some respect, brought them to a 9 or 10 win level, and they plateaued. And now it seems to be going in the other direction following last season's bowl loss to a Nebraska team that was under 500 and now losing all these games this year and most likely not getting to postseason play. That the shine has certainly come off of Jim Mora, even though he's still bringing in top 15 recruiting classes.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a huge part of the problem this year was this change in offensive style it's a pretty big one, and it seems to have been pretty abrupt. When you're trying to go pro style, you've got to get big guys up front. That's one thing, you can knock Stanford's recruiting restrictions all you like, but that's one thing they do well. They get a ton of big guys up front, and that allows you to run 30, 40 times a game if you'd like. I don't think they've been really doing that. And so while they have running backs, they have a ton of great receivers, a ton of great receiving targets to throw the ball to, but you don't need that many if you're going to run pro style. So you've got all these guys to spread it out and throw it, but you're trying to, put a square peg in a round hole. And I think that's going to cause some problems. Now that you stack the injuries on top of it, you stack just the general parity and quirkiness of the Pac-12, and the wheels are going to come off the bus pretty quickly. So I don't know, maybe you could have done a better job transitioning this over several years. I'm not sure what the answer is there, but I think a lot of things have just sort of all converged to create one particularly bad season. But hopefully they get Rosen back. They get some more, big guys up front. They do get a running game going. And if that's because their defense is still great, their defense is still solid. And if you've got a good defense, you should, in theory, at least be competitive against pretty much whoever you play. But I think it was just an abrupt change, and down the road, hopefully, if their plan works out, it'll help them out. But right now, I think they just had to take it on the chin for a season.
And for you NFL draftniks out there who are scouting for the next level, UCLA, despite the 6 losses, still at that level to provide those kind of scouting tips. But in particular, you got to check out this Takris McKinley on the defensive side of the ball for UCLA. He has been a force. 18 tackles for loss, 10 sacks. I've watched him play. I watched a lot of the Utah game, and he just wreaked havoc in the backfield, and that's been the case for the entire season. Okay, let's focus on USC because they're the storyline. Is this the best team in the Pac-12? We have thought since day one that it was Washington once they established their dominance early on, and with the number of NFL prospects on defense and with the quarterback that's throwing the ball as good as anyone in the nation and Jake Browning for most of the season, Myles Gaskin, they seem to have it all. But USC on the scoreboard didn't blow them out, but they were clearly the better team on that night in Seattle.
Yeah, I think this goes to one of those debates that I think the college football's current playoff committee is currently swirling around in. You just look at overall record, or do you look at sort of the complete picture? How are they doing right now? Well, how USC is doing right now? Yeah, they just knocked off what everyone assumed was the unequivocal best team in the Pac-12, and they did it in Seattle, where not a lot of teams win at any level of football, mind you. It's just tough to play there, and they came in and with the exception of like a pretty awful start to the third quarter, USC won that entire 60 minutes. So I think the playoff committee, given the fact that they're the highest 3-loss team in the country, they're 13th, has said right now they're the best. But they've also got Colorado, Utah, and Washington still ahead of them. But who wants to play USC right now? I mean, honestly, UCLA does because it's a rivalry game. But if you're, I don't think Colorado or Utah would want to have to play and beat USC right now to make the Pac-12 championship game. So they're red hot. They seem to be doing well in just about every phase, except they're still kind of sloppy with the penalties. And they're still having some turnover issues. Sam Darnold's been great, but he is still a freshman, and he will do freshman things, as all freshmen do. But right now, they're red hot. Who would want to play these guys? If they just knocked off Washington, who else in the Pac-12 is really going to take a run at these guys?
And on the surface, at 6-1, with USC settling in at 6-2, you would assume that the two teams in front of them have a decided advantage. Well, they do in terms of record, but if you look at the matchups, there is some hope there. It's not a probability, but there is some serious hope for USC to make it to the Pac-12 championship game. With Utah having to face Oregon, they should win that game. But then you've got a Colorado-Utah matchup that the Buffs need to win for USC after Colorado loses to Washington State, which is certainly a possibility this week. So about three things need to break right, but they all definitely could happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. The most likely path is the Cougs beat Buffalo on Saturday, and then Colorado beats Utah in the following Saturday. If that happens, USC goes. I have been doing this long enough to know that the most likely path in the Pac-12 rarely happens, even if we get to the same place we all expected to get to. So I think Colorado-Washington State is going to be a huge, huge game. I don't know who's going to win that. I really don't know who would be the favorite. But if Colorado wins this week, then USC is either going to need Oregon to beat Utah, or that's pretty much it, I believe. Yeah, because they both can't lose when they play each other. The fact that Colorado is playing Utah the last week of the regular season really kind of limits USC's options. So they really need the Cougars, either Washington State or Oregon. One of them has to win on Saturday. And, of course, USC has to win in order for the Trojans to make it. It's unlikely, but it's possible.
So despite the level of play for both these teams coming in, Vegas has it at 12.5 for USC. The game's at the Rose Bowl. I don't think that's much of an advantage for UCLA, but it's a rivalry, and the talent is comparable, minus the quarterback situation with Josh Rosen out of the game, and Vegas capitalizing possibly on a rivalry here because USC would seem to be better than 12 points, better than the Bruins. Do you have a thought on that one?
Yeah, yes, I think on paper USC is at least two touchdowns better than USC, but it is a rivalry game. We do historically see players come out and play above their capabilities in a rivalry game. The fact that there's something to be said for the hate aspect and being able to knock off this great USC run that they're having and not completely obliterate their chances of making the conference championship game. I honestly think that would probably be a bigger motivating factor than UCLA trying to get to a bowl game. So you have to account for that. You also have to account for maybe success getting to these kids' heads. It's a young team. They just knocked off the best in the West. And now they're coming in against the lowly little brother at 4-6. Maybe they lose focus. A lot of weird things happen in rivalry week. I feel like it's probably just Vegas hedging their bets would be my guess. But again, if you're taking gambling advice from me, then please get help.
Yeah, that's what I do later in the week is throw my picks out there strictly for recreational purposes because if anybody's laying $1 on what I have to say about college football lines, please get help.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So it's USC, UCLA. It's the Battle of Los Angeles. It's one of my favorite rivalries and one of the most prestigious in college football. And it's USC with a 13-4 edge in the last 17 meetings in this one at the Rose Bowl after the Trojans trounced UCLA in what appeared to be a good matchup last year at 40-21. Nick Dempsey from Conquest Chronicles breaking down the Bruins and the Trojans. Thanks, Nick.
Of course, Mark, anytime.